Sunday lunch betrayal. I never thought I'd be the type of person to kick my own family out of my house. Growing up, I was taught that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, and that no matter what happens, you always make room at your table for the people who share your DNA. But that Sunday in March, when I stood in my kitchen staring at an empty counter where my plate should have been, I realized that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. Let me back up a bit. My name is Sarah, and I'm 34 years old. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in suburban Ohio that I've been paying for completely on my own for the past 3 years. The mortgage payments are $1,147 a month, and that's not counting the property taxes, insurance, and all the repairs that seem to pop up every few months. I work as a regional manager for a logistics company, and while I make decent money, it's not like I'm rolling in cash. Every dollar has to be accounted for, every expense carefully planned. The thing is, my family has always treated my house like their personal meeting hall. My mother, Patricia, decided years ago that Sunday lunches would happen at my place because it's the biggest house among all my siblings. Never mind that I'm the one buying all the groceries, doing all the cooking, and cleaning up the mess afterward. Never mind that I'm the one who can barely afford the mortgage payments while they all live in rental apartments or with roommates. My brother Marcus, who's 28 and still lives with his girlfriend's parents, always shows up empty-handed, but somehow manages to eat enough for 3 people. My sister Jennifer, 31 and divorced, brings her 2 kids, but never offers to help with anything. She just sits at my kitchen table scrolling through her phone, while her 8-year-old son Jackson and 6-year-old daughter Emma run around my house like it's a playground. Then there's my mother, who acts like she's doing me some great favor by gracing my home with her presence. She'll walk through my front door, inspect everything like she's a health inspector, and then proceed to criticize my cooking, my decorating choices, and my life decisions. But she never offers to help cook, never brings a dish to share, and certainly never offers to help with the grocery bill that's been slowly draining my savings account. This particular Sunday started like all the others. I spent Saturday afternoon at the grocery store, spending $127 on ingredients for a meal that would feed 6 adults and 2 children. I bought a nice roast, fresh vegetables, ingredients for homemade mashed potatoes, and all the fixings for a proper Sunday dinner. I even splurged on a dessert from the bakery section because I knew Jennifer's kids would complain if there wasn't something sweet. I woke up at 7 in the morning to start the prep work. The roast needed to go in the oven early, and I wanted to make sure everything was perfect. I'd learned over the years that if the food wasn't restaurant quality, I'd hear about it for weeks. My mother had this way of making passive-aggressive comments about my cooking that would stick with me long after everyone had gone home. As I was seasoning the roast, I caught myself thinking about my friend Lisa, who lived in California. She'd been trying to get me to visit for months, but I could never afford the plane ticket. Between the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries for these family dinners, and all the other expenses that came with home ownership, I was barely breaking even each month. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night wondering if I'd made a mistake buying this house, if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But then I'd remember how proud I felt when I first got the keys. I was the first person in my family to own a home. My parents had rented their entire lives, moving from apartment to apartment every few years when landlords raised the rent or when they couldn't make payments. I'd worked so hard to build my credit, to save for a down payment, to prove to the bank that I was worthy of a mortgage. This house represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd achieved on my own. The family started arriving around noon. Marcus came first, as usual, walking straight to my refrigerator and helping himself to a beer without asking. He flopped down on my couch with his feet up on my coffee table, leaving muddy prints on the glass surface I'd just cleaned that morning. Jennifer arrived next with the kids, who immediately started running up and down my hallway, their shoes squeaking on the hardwood floors I'd spent a fortune refinishing last year. Emma went straight to my bedroom, which was off limits, and started playing with my jewelry box while Jennifer chatted on her phone in the kitchen. My mother was the last to arrive, and she came through the door like she owned the place. She walked directly to my stove, lifted the lid on my pot potatoes, and made a face like she'd smelled something rotten. "The food is almost ready," I announced, trying to keep my voice cheerful. I'd learned that any hint of frustration or tiredness in my tone would result in a lecture about my attitude. Jennifer finally got off her phone and started setting the table. But as she was putting out the plates, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. She'd set out 7 plates. 7! I counted them twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things wrong. "Jennifer," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you only set out 7 plates. There are 8 of us." She looked at the table, then at me, and shrugged. "Oh, I thought there were only 7. Sorry." But instead of adding another plate, she just stood there, like she was waiting for me to figure out which one of us wasn't important enough to deserve a plate. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. The plate that was missing wasn't just any plate, it was mine. The person who had bought all the food, who had spent all morning cooking, who was paying for the roof over all their heads, didn't have a place to sit at her own table. I walked over to the cabinet and got my own plate. My hands were shaking slightly as I placed it at the head of the table, in the spot where I always sat. No one said anything. No one apologized or acknowledged what had just happened. As we all sat down to eat, I tried to push the incident out of my mind. Maybe it was just an honest mistake. Maybe Jennifer had simply miscounted. But as I looked around the table at my family, I started to notice other things that had been bothering me for months, but that I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Marcus was already on his 2nd helping of roast before I'd even finished serving everyone. He was eating like he hadn't seen food in weeks, but I knew for a fact that he and his girlfriend ate out at restaurants 4 or 5 times a week. Meanwhile, I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day to save money for these family dinners. Jennifer was letting her kids make a mess with their food, mashed potatoes smeared on my good tablecloth, gravy dripping onto my dining room chairs. She didn't seem to notice or care that I'd be the one cleaning it all up after they left. My mother was picking at her food and making faces, like she was suffering through every bite. She kept making little comments under her breath about how the roast was a bit dry, how the potatoes needed more salt, how the vegetables were overcooked. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. But the worst part was the conversation. They were talking about their lives, their jobs, their problems, like I was invisible. Marcus was complaining about his boss, Jennifer was talking about her ex-husband's latest drama, and my mother was giving unsolicited advice to everyone except me. When I tried to join the conversation, to mention something about my work or my life, they'd either ignore me or give me a polite smile before immediately changing the subject. I felt like a servant in my own home. Like my only purpose was to provide the venue and the food while they enjoyed themselves. I was starting to realize that this wasn't just about the missing plate. This was about years of being taken for granted, of being treated like my contributions didn't matter. After dinner, everyone moved to the living room while I started clearing the table. I waited for someone to offer to help, but no one did. They were all too busy digesting their free meal and enjoying the comfortable atmosphere of my home that I was struggling to afford. As I was loading the dishwasher, I overheard Marcus talking to Jennifer in the living room. He was saying something about how lucky I was to have such a nice house, how he wished he could afford a place like this. Jennifer agreed, saying that I must be making really good money to afford such a big mortgage. They were talking about me like I wasn't there, like I couldn't hear them. But what bothered me most was that they seemed to think my financial situation was so much better than theirs. They had no idea that I was living paycheck to paycheck, that I was sacrificing my own comfort and opportunities to maintain this house that they all enjoyed every Sunday. I stood there at my sink, scrubbing the roasting pan that was caked with grease and burnt bits. And I started to think about all the things I'd given up over the past few years. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I hadn't bought myself new clothes in months. I'd been driving the same car for 8 years because I couldn't afford payments on something newer. I'd even canceled my gym membership to save money. But my family didn't see any of that. They saw the house, the home-cooked meals, the comfortable furniture, and they assumed I had it made. They didn't see the stress, the sleepless nights worrying about money, the constant anxiety about whether I'd be able to make my mortgage payment each month. As I was putting the clean dishes away, my mother came into the kitchen. Instead of offering to help, she started her usual post-meal critique. "The roast was a little tough, Sarah. You might want to cook it at a lower temperature next time. And the potatoes were a bit bland. You should add more butter and cream." Every word felt like a small knife wound. I'd spent all morning preparing this meal, spent money I didn't really have, and instead of gratitude, I was getting criticism. "I'll remember that for next time," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She continued talking, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I was thinking about how exhausted I was, how much I'd been looking forward to a quiet evening after everyone left. But I knew that wouldn't happen. I'd spend the next 2 hours cleaning up the mess, washing the dishes that didn't fit in the dishwasher, scrubbing the stains out of my tablecloth, and trying to get the crayon marks off my wall where Emma had been drawing. When I finally finished in the kitchen, I joined everyone in the living room. Marcus was stretched out on my couch like he owned it. Jennifer was letting her kids jump on my furniture, and my mother was pointing out all the things in my house that needed to be fixed or updated. "You really should do something about that scuff mark on the wall, Sarah. It makes the whole room look shabby." I looked at the scuff mark she was pointing to. It was barely visible, maybe 2 inches long, probably from when I'd moved my bookshelf last month. But to her it was a major flaw that needed to be addressed immediately. "I'll take care of it," I said automatically. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I realized something. I was tired of apologizing for my house, tired of being criticized for things that didn't really matter, tired of feeling like nothing I did was ever good enough. I started thinking about all the Sunday dinners we'd shared over the past 3 years. How many times had anyone thanked me for cooking? How many times had anyone offered to bring a dish or help with the groceries? How many times had anyone acknowledged that I was the one making all of this possible? I couldn't remember a single time. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself getting more and more irritated by little things. The way Marcus kept helping himself to drinks from my refrigerator without asking. The way Jennifer was letting her kids make a mess of my magazine collection. The way my mother kept making suggestions about how I should redecorate my living room. But what really pushed me over the edge was when I overheard Marcus and Jennifer talking in my kitchen. They were looking through my mail, which I'd left on the counter, and commenting on my bills. "Jesus, look at this electric bill. How does she afford all this?" Jennifer was saying. "She must be making bank at that job of hers," Marcus replied. "I wish I could afford to live like this." I stood in the doorway, watching them go through my personal mail like it was public information. They were looking at my mortgage statement, my utility bills, my credit card statements. They were commenting on my financial situation like it was their business. That's when something inside me snapped. I walked into the kitchen and very calmly took the mail out of Marcus's hands. "I think it's time for everyone to go home," I said. My voice was steady, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I'd never asked my family to leave before. I'd never set any boundaries or stood up for myself in any meaningful way. Marcus looked confused. "It's only 3 o'clock, Sarah. We usually stay until evening." "Not today," I said. "I'm tired and I have things to do." Jennifer came into the kitchen with her kids trailing behind her. "What's going on?" she asked. "Sarah wants us to leave," Marcus said, like I'd just announced that I was planning to burn the house down. My mother appeared in the doorway looking annoyed. "Sarah, what's gotten into you?" We're family, we don't kick family out. I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me to always put family first, and I realized that she had never applied that same principle to herself. She had never put my needs first, never considered my feelings, never acknowledged my sacrifices. Family, I said, my voice getting stronger, would have noticed that I didn't have a plate at my own table today. Family would have offered to help with the cooking or the cleaning. Family would have thanked me for the meal instead of criticizing it. Family wouldn't go through my personal mail and comment on my bills. The kitchen went silent. Everyone was staring at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Sarah, you're overreacting," my mother said. "It was just a mistake with the plate." But I was done accepting their explanations, done making excuses for their behavior, done pretending that their treatment of me was normal or acceptable. "It wasn't just the plate," I said. "It's everything. It's the fact that I pay for all the food, do all the cooking, clean up all the mess, and never get so much as a thank you. It's the fact that you all act like this house is your personal restaurant, and I'm your personal servant." Marcus stood up, looking uncomfortable. "Come on, Sarah. We're grateful. We just don't say it all the time. When was the last time any of you brought a dish to share?" I asked. "When was the last time any of you offered to help with the groceries? When was the last time any of you helped clean up after dinner?" They all looked at each other, but no one answered. "I work 45 hours a week to afford this house," I continued. "I sacrifice my own comfort, my own desires, my own financial security to maintain a home that you all enjoy every Sunday. And instead of appreciation, I get criticism. Instead of help, I get more work. Instead of respect, I get treated like I'm invisible." Jennifer was the first to speak up. "We didn't know you felt this way," she said quietly. "I've been feeling this way for years," I replied, "but I kept quiet because I thought that's what family was supposed to do. I thought I was supposed to sacrifice for you all without expecting anything in return." My mother was shaking her head. "You're being selfish, Sarah. Family is supposed to help each other." "I am helping," I said. "I've been helping every Sunday for 3 years. I've spent thousands of dollars on food, utilities, and maintaining this house so you all can have a nice place to gather. What I want to know is when any of you are going to help me." The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I'd never confronted my family like this before, never stood up for myself so directly. Finally, Marcus started gathering his things. "If that's how you feel, maybe we should go." As they all started moving toward the door, I expected to feel guilty. I expected to want to call them back, to apologize, to pretend that everything was fine. But instead, I felt relief. I felt like I could finally breathe again. Jennifer paused at the door with her kids. "Are we still doing Sunday dinner next week?" she asked. "Not here," I said. "Not unless things change." My mother was the last to leave. She stood at my front door, looking at me like she didn't recognize me. "I raised you better than this, Sarah. Family doesn't abandon family." "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said. "I'm just no longer willing to be taken for granted." After they left, I stood in my living room and looked around at my house. It was quiet for the first time in hours. There were still dishes to finish, still messes to clean up. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was in my own home, rather than just the caretaker of everyone else's meeting place. I walked to my kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. As I sat at my table, in the spot where my plate should have been from the beginning, I started thinking about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. I realized that I'd been so focused on trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect hostess, that I'd forgotten to be true to myself. I'd been so afraid of disappointing my family that I'd been willing to disappoint myself every single week. Over the next few days, I didn't hear from any of them. Part of me wondered if they were waiting for me to call and apologize, to invite them back for the next Sunday dinner like nothing had happened. But I didn't call. For the first time in years, I spent my weekend doing things I wanted to do instead of preparing for another exhausting family gathering. I went to the movies by myself, something I'd been wanting to do for months. I slept in on Sunday morning instead of waking up early to prep food. I spent the afternoon reading a book in my garden, enjoying the quiet and the peace of my own space. When the following Sunday came around, I cooked a simple meal for myself. Just a chicken breast and some vegetables, nothing fancy. But as I sat at my table, eating off my own plate in my own house, I felt more satisfied than I had in years. It was about 2 weeks later when Jennifer called me. She wanted to know if I was still mad, if we could work things out. She said that everyone missed our Sunday dinners, that the family wasn't the same without our weekly gatherings. I told her that I missed them too, but that I wasn't willing to go back to the way things were. If they wanted to have family dinners, everyone would need to contribute. Whether that meant bringing a dish, helping with the groceries, or taking turns hosting, I was done being the only one who sacrificed for these gatherings. She said she understood and that she'd talked to everyone else, but I could tell from her tone that she thought I was being unreasonable, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. A few more weeks passed, and I started to realize that my family's silence spoke volumes. They weren't willing to change, weren't willing to acknowledge that their behavior had been unfair. They wanted things to go back to exactly the way they were, with me providing everything and them taking it for granted. But I wasn't the same person anymore. Standing up for myself that Sunday had awakened something in me that I hadn't felt in years. I remembered what it felt like to have boundaries, to expect respect, to value my own needs and desires. I started using the money I'd been spending on Sunday dinners to pay down my credit card debt. I started saving for that trip to visit Lisa in California. I started making plans for home improvements that I wanted, not changes that would impress my family. My mother eventually called me, about a month after the incident. She wanted to know if I was ready to stop being stubborn and resume our normal Sunday dinners. She said that my behavior had been hurtful to the whole family, that I was tearing us apart over something silly. I told her that I loved her and that I wanted to have a relationship with all of them, but that it would have to be based on mutual respect and consideration. I wasn't willing to be the only one who gave while everyone else took. She hung up on me. That was 6 months ago. I haven't spoken to any of them since. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, if I should have just accepted their behavior and been grateful for the family I had. But then I remember how I felt that Sunday, standing in my own kitchen without a plate, and I know that I couldn't have continued living that way. I've learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who take advantage of you the most. They do it gradually in small ways until you don't even realize how much of yourself you've given up to keep them happy. I've also learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's the only way to have healthy relationships, even with family members. Last month, I finally took that trip to California to visit Lisa. I used some of the money I'd been saving by not hosting expensive family dinners every week. As I sat on the beach in San Diego, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, I felt a peace that I hadn't experienced in years. I thought about that Sunday in March, about the missing plate that had finally opened my eyes to years of being taken for granted. I thought about how scared I'd been to stand up for myself, how worried I'd been about disappointing my family. But I realized that I'd been so focused on not disappointing them that I'd been disappointing myself for years. I'd been so afraid of being alone that I'd accepted being treated poorly just to have people around my table. Now, when I sit at my table on Sunday afternoons, I'm often alone. But I'm not lonely. I'm at peace. I'm in my own home, eating food that I chose, spending time the way I want to spend it. I still hope that someday my family will realize that relationships require effort from everyone involved. I hope that they'll understand that love isn't just about showing up and taking what's offered, but about giving back and showing appreciation. But even if they never change, I know that I made the right choice. I chose to value myself, to demand respect, to refuse to be taken for granted. And that choice has made all the difference in my life. Sometimes I look at that spot at my kitchen table where my plate should have been that Sunday, and I remember how small and invisible I felt in that moment. But I also remember how powerful I felt when I finally found my voice and asked them to leave. That missing plate taught me that sometimes the most important person to stand up for is yourself. Even if it means standing alone,